Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Inverclyde for bringing forward this debate, and as been said, it's the second day in a row that we are debating this important issue, and I appreciate the depth of feeling on this, and I know there were members who wished to speak today that couldn't, including the Honourable Member for Gower, my honourable friend from Dover, whose constituent is Tegan Appleby, and my honourable friend from South Derbyshire, and many, many others who would have liked to have contributed to this debate. And as I said yesterday, I have huge sympathy for the issues and problems and struggles that patients and their families who are trying desperately to access these drugs are facing. And no one wants a resolution to this more than me, as is the case with the Secretary of State, who, as has been said a number of times today, went and changed the law when he was Home Secretary in order to try and resolve this situation. And yesterday I confirmed the government's absolute commitment to take an evidence-based approach to unlicensed cannabis-based products for medicinal use, to ensure that there's evidence that they are effective but also safe. And a number of colleagues have said, well, why can't the government accept non-randomised controlled trials as evidence? The government isn't involved in the process of licensing the medicines at all. This is done by the independent regulator, and the government's responsibility is in changing the law, which has already been done. But I very much take the point that we should be able to influence the speed in which the licensing process can take place, and I will point out in my remarks how we are doing that, and I'm willing to work with colleagues across the House, whether it's the Honourable Member for Manchester Withington with his Private Members Bill, or colleagues from the SNP. You know, this is a non-political issue that we want to see resolved, but the government is not the body that's responsible for licensing medication or assessing the worthiness of the research, whether that's randomised controlled trials or any other form of evidence. But before I come to setting out what is being done, I just want to provide an update on the matter of Bedrickan, because a number of members, the Honourable Member for North Tyneside, the Honourable Member for Reigate and Inverclyde, all mentioned this. And I just want to provide an update on that. The commercial agreement between Transvaal Apotheke and a UK specialist medicines manufacturer, Target Healthcare, is progressing, and the MHRA and the Home Office are working with these companies to ensure all regulatory standards for manufacturing these medicines are met. On the 16th of September, the Home Office granted a 6-month licence, which will allow Target to move on to testing their equipment and procedures using cannabis from the Netherlands and validating their production of Bedrickan oils. Department officials continue to work closely with the Dutch government, Transvaal, the Home Office and the MHRA to ensure continuity of supply until domestic production can be established. And I will keep the House updated on progress, so hopefully that's a little glimmer of hope on that issue. But I am aware that there is huge patient demand for access to medical cannabis, and many who are convinced that it's helping them with an array of medical conditions from chronic pain to cancer. But to date, much of the evidence suggesting cannabis could be effective as a treatment is anecdotal, and while that has, in observational studies, some strength, from a regulator's point of view, often they need more robust clinical data than that. There are 2 licensed cannabis-based products and 1 synthetic cannabinoid that mimics the effect of THC, which is the element that I think most campaigners are looking for. We do have Sativex to treat severe spasticity in adults with multiple sclerosis, Epidiolex for the treatment of 2 rare forms of epilepsy, and Nabilone for nausea and vomiting. So we are making some progress, but I hear from campaigners it's the THC element that still remains outstanding. But the ones that are licensed are proof that when manufacturers invest in clinical trials, the potential of cannabis as a medicine can be realised, and clinical trials generate the data needed by our world-leading medicines regulator, the MHRA, to assess for safety. and then for NICE to then approve it in terms of the NHS funding element. And I just want to reiterate that to colleagues, that there's a multiple step process. I know one of the contributors today raised, or can be, the issue there wasn't about the licensing. That had a license. The issue was around NHS funding. And if we get to that stage, there is a huge amount more the government can do in terms of fast-tracking that and being involved in discussions. But around the licensing itself, that is an independent process, which is where we're stuck at now.
I use that parallel really as an example. I totally respect her point about licensing. Of course she's correct on licensing progress, but it's actually about imaginative thinking to work our way through the problem to the right solution, and that applies desperately in this situation, as it did with Orkambi.
Absolutely, and we will try. The government is very committed to trying to resolve this blockage on the licensing element, which is really the main factor that's hindering the prescribing of these drugs. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, whilst Home Secretary, did change the law, and we're aware that the change of the law wasn't at the end of the issue, and that's why we are taking the next steps that we are. But it is important to not just dismiss the importance of having licensed medication. We know from history that when medication that may have a good clinical effect, when it's not tested thoroughly, such as thalidomide in the past, can have grave consequences. So the safety of a medicine is as important as the efficacy. And I'm not casting any aspersions on cannabis, but the regulator has that responsibility for all medicines, and they take that responsibility very seriously. I will.
That argument would surely carry more weight if the people doing the testing would outline some sort of timeline and programme for concluding their testing programme, rather than apparently letting things drift on aimlessly for years on end.
Yeah, I take my honourable friend's point, and I will come on to that in terms of the timelines of research that is in progress and is starting. But let's be clear, no licensing authority across the world has licensed many of the products that we're talking about today. The FDA, the EMA, and also our own domestic MHRA. So this isn't just a UK problem, and I want to make that clear, that it's not the UK government that's holding this back at all. As I said yesterday, I encourage manufacturers of these products to invest in clinical trials, and I just want to say, part of the work the department is doing is providing funding for the NIHR, which is the National Institute for Health Research, and they are actively opening their arms, whether it's to charities, academics, to researchers, to manufacturers, to third sector organisations, that there is funding available for these clinical trials. And if anyone wants to come forward with a clinical trial, whether that's a randomised control trial, an observational study, a randomised control trial without a placebo arm, there's a number of research phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical studies. The funding is there, and the MHRA is also willing to provide advice and support for any potential applicants who want to conduct a clinical trial to seek licence for their medicine. So the funding's there, the support is there. We really do need some researchers coming forward with clinical trials. I will make that.
I remind you that while it's Category 2, a lot of those research institutes are restricted in what they can do because they're trying to access a Category 2 product. If it was Category 4, life would be a lot simpler for them.
The honourable gentleman makes an excellent point, and this is the area where we need to unblock some of these blockages, and that's perhaps some of the work that needs to happen going forward. Very much take that point on board. But clinical trials and the licensing process also provide evidence and information that doctors rely on to support their treatment decisions. And clinicians are currently, the feedback that many have given is they're reticent to prescribe these products until there is more evidence, because ultimately they are responsible for their patients in terms of safety and effectiveness. And doctors are particularly unwilling around the THC element of cannabis products, because there is some emerging data of evidence of potential, particularly in children, of harm, including effects on the developing brain and heart. And so that's why that evidence base is so crucial. And I'm very happy, especially with the Honourable Gentleman with his private members bill, to look at what blockages could be unblocked to speed that process up. Because doctors are right to be cautious in prescribing any product if they are not confident in the evidence base in front of them. But as I said yesterday, I'm absolutely clear that like any medication, it remains a clinical decision. It would be inappropriate for government to force clinicians to prescribe medicine, but we will try and unblock some of the licensing blockages there. I know how difficult it is, but just to highlight some of the studies that are starting to take off. I think maybe one of the contributors did mention this, but from the 1st of April, the establishment of clinical trials with the NHS England and the NIHR, we've introduced a national patient registry. So this will record patient outcomes and it's with a view to being rolled out across the devolved administrations as well. So it's in England only at the moment. And what we're aiming to do is just record the data of those who are receiving the medicines and then look at side effects, efficacy, a whole range of issues to support clinicians working with those patients so we start to build up an evidence base. In addition to this, there is a randomised controlled trial that is being set up that has 3 arms to it that will include CBD, but also 1 arm with CBD, THC, and then 1 arm with placebo. That is being set up right now. We expect it to open fairly soon, and those who are looking to, those children in particular who are looking to access these drugs will be able to access those, although in a blinded way on the study, to take part. And if that data comes through relatively quickly, then that opens up opportunities to submit evidence to the MHRA. I will give way.
Offering a child who's currently on medication which has stopped them having 100 seizures a day a random test which potentially has a placebo in there, who would do that?
So I take the honourable gentleman's point, but there are many children who aren't accessing that medication, and this is a route to that. And I think I explained in the debate yesterday, in clinical randomised controlled trials where there is a placebo arm, there's extremely strict rules, and that if one arm is showing incredible progress and is doing better than the other arms of the study, then the study has to be stopped, patients unblinded, and everyone is switched on to the arm that is doing the best. And in some circumstances, that has enabled people to access drugs under clinical research in a much quicker way. So it does have some advantages as well. I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, but that's all very well, but it does bring us back to the fact that there are children who are already benefiting. And even the NHS has asked, would it not be beneficial to have an alternative trial, such as an observational one, and use that evidence rather than a clinical trial with all these, pitfalls?
I take the Honourable Lady's point, but the MHRA, who are the regulator, and other regulators around the world, have a tier of research that they will accept, and the randomised controlled trial method is the gold standard, and you're Mr Deputy Speaker, much more likely to get a trial approved quickly the more randomised control data you have. Observational studies, of course, they will be used, and that is why if there's researchers who want to do observational studies and have a large group, I hear about the Sapphire Clinic from the Honourable Member for Inverdale, if they wanted to come forward with observational data, then I would encourage them to speak to the MHRA to see if that's the sort of research that would be acceptable. It's important they have those discussions with the regulating body, because they may well accept some of that evidence. But until we really get manufacturers, researchers, academics, those using these drugs in practice, coming forward with whatever research they feel would be acceptable and have those discussions, we're just going to end up going round in a virtuous circle, in a sense. But if I'm keen that if observational studies are acceptable, that we support those to happen. Whatever it takes in terms of research terms to get a licence through, the government is there providing funding, it's there providing advice, and it's there providing support. But ultimately, it's not the body that can make that decision. But I think there's a willingness around the House today to try and find a resolution to this.